Cancer impacted the way that I not only manage and lead people, but also the way I've approached being a husband of 30 years now, how I parent my children, who are both now grown. So yeah, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my experience with cancer.
What if a year of hardship became the foundation for a life of purpose and leadership? Our guest today, Steve Garraty, faced that reality at just 18 when he was diagnosed with cancer. Instead of letting it define him, he used the experience to grow stronger, lead with intention, and inspire others. Now a regional vice president of sales and longtime pediatric cancer advocate, Steve has built winning teams, mentored future leaders, and championed resilience in both business and life. He's also the author of Grapefruit, How Cancer Led to Living a More Fruitful Life, which I, of course, loved reading and enjoyed talking about in this episode. In this book, he shares how adversity shaped his perspective on leadership, gratitude, and success. Today, we'll explore his journey, the power of mindset, and how to turn life's toughest moments into opportunities for growth. Now, if you're new to the podcast, welcome to our community. We are thrilled that you've taken time out of your day to learn and grow with us. So before you forget, please take a moment to click that subscribe button to ensure you stay connected with the Badass Leaders community and you help us bring more amazing leaders to the podcast. And if you leave a comment, you'll get a personal response from me. So let's do this. Join me, Angela Gill Nelms, on today's episode of the Badass Leaders podcast, where I'm joined each week by industry experts for intimate and eye-opening discussions about the challenges and joys facing the leaders of today. Listen in and get ready to scale your company, grow your brand, and unlock your full badass potential. Welcome to AGN Studios.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes.
This is awesome.
This is amazing. So I have Steve Garraty, correct?
Yes, correct.
And this is a funny thing. I love people's names, and then when I forget to ask how to pronounce their names, I always feel quite silly. See, we're all human. So I have Steve here, though. He is the author of the book Grapefruit, which is spelled great fruit. We're going to talk about the meaning of that. And it is his story about how cancer led to living a more fruitful life. It's broken up into two parts. The first half is kind of like your story with cancer. The second half is all your leadership style about it.
That's, pretty accurate.
Yeah, I love it. But why don't we kick off by you introducing yourself and telling us why you're here?
Sure. Steve Garraty. I grew up in the Atlanta area. I live in Florida now, but Angela and I share a mutual friend who I think introduced us. And the book I wrote, which I know we'll dive into, really impacted the way cancer impacted the way that I not only manage and lead people, but also the way I've approached being a husband of 30 years now, how I parent my children, who are both now grown. So yeah, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my experience with cancer, and it really drives kind of how I live my life.
Perfect. So we will give a shout out to Nick and thank him for introducing both of us. Now, he didn't tell me that you're a UGA grad and I'm a Georgia Tech grad, but
I knew
it's okay.
that would come up early.
It's okay. So one of the things, Steve, when I was reading the book, first off, because I've had my own tragedies and I've known so many people that have had big challenges in their life and have said, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It completely changed my life in a better way. And I've watched so many other people think, have they lost their mind? Are they crazy? Yeah. What drugs are they doing? That kind of stuff, right? However, when I was reading your book, I was like, this 18-year-old is going to die in a car accident. Like, I was all into all of your escapades in high school. And I immediately saw how this could have a huge positive impact on you. So why don't we dig in first and talk about the reason for the name of the book and the premise behind, and then we'll dig into the leadership on the second half.
Yeah. I'll start with the premise. Why did I write the book? Is that a good place to start?
Love it.
So I graduated from high school here in Atlanta, and about a month after graduating high school, I had a mass in the side of my neck. I went in, got a biopsy, and found out on July 4th. So I had surgery on July 3rd. On July 4th, they called my house to inform me that I had Hodgkin's, which is a form of cancer. Pretty common, not common, but it's a common cancer for 18 to 25-year-olds. And so then I had to go through a process of getting x-rays, CAT scans to figure out how much had it spread. And I was stage 3, which meant it was in my neck, chest, and stomach. But the reason for the title, or how the title came about, it was the surgeon who took it out said it was the size of a grapefruit. And so I've been writing this book for 37 years, believe it or not, on and more off than on, but it took me 37 years to write it. And I had more trouble with the title than anything else. I
Really?
just could not come up with a title. And I'm not that creative. And so a friend of mine who lives here in Atlanta, he and I were having drinks, hadn't seen him in 25 years. And I think this ties into some of the themes in my book. Mm-hmm. I'm very passionate about building and maintaining relationships. And so this guy and I worked together in our first job right out of college and have kind of stayed in touch, but I reached out to him. We had drinks. It was like we had never missed a beat. And I was telling him about my book and that I was struggling with a title. He's very creative, marketing major. And he said, let me read it and I'll come up with a title. So he gave me a list of like 15 and Grapefruit. I loved it, because cancer ended up being a blessing. And so it was a combination of the mass in my neck. It's how we found it, with it being a blessing. So I loved the title and rolled with it.
I thought when I was reading it and, obviously you're like teasing into the fact you're going to have cancer, right? 'Cause you're like, something's in my throat. And when I drink alcohol, I feel weird in my throat. And your friend's mom, who was a nurse, was the one that really noticed the growth and then how it just pivoted your life after that. So I found just picturing that and trying to think of, my own daughter going through those stages and how that could be just something that would be very easy, especially for a very active young boy at that age, to just ignore. I don't have time to deal with this. I'm going to live forever and keep going.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to talk about, and I'm assuming the doctor's names are pseudo names, whatever you want to pin name, whatever you call them.
The first one is.
Okay. I saw the name and I was like, there's no way that's what someone's
Dr.
name
Blackhart. Yeah. So I did come up with that. That was creative. But yeah, the first doctor was not a good experience, as you read about. The second doctor, he unfortunately passed away, but he was a doctor here at Emory. And I did use his real name because he was a saint.
Amazing.
Everything about him was in the book was extremely positive. So.
Yep. So a couple of the things that I wanted to kick off and talk about, and one you just mentioned, the value of relationships and people. And so I liked when you talked in the book, and this is actually, so I didn't mean to jump this far back, but we're going to. It's in the silver lining. So we'll kick off with silver lining. So it's on page 141, and you talk about how you should take stock of what you invite into your life, what books you read, what music you listen to, what television shows or movies do you watch, and do they contribute to a positive and uplifting experience? So my question, I love that because I am a firm believer of being a lifelong learner and surrounding yourself in excellent. Can you talk, though, about what you surrounded yourself with before cancer, how cancer and healing from it helped shape your thoughts along this journey?
Yeah, so before cancer is kind of the beginning of the book, right? And I was not a good kid at all. I would say my last 2 years in high school were heavy drinking, heavy partying, and that continued to spiral downward. And so, and I do believe it played a large part in me getting sick. It caused a lot of friction with my family, caused friction with my parents, my siblings. I wrecked my parents' car 5 times during my last 2 years in high school. And towards the end, I started doing drugs. I was drinking liquor to the point of blacking out every single night, literally went out every night. And right after high school, was going out every night. But even my senior year, I was drinking before school. It was just, I was headed down a bad path. And so cancer ended up being a blessing in that it was kind of my wake-up call. So I think then there were a lot of, to answer your question, there was negative influences in my life. Once I got cancer, majority of my friends kind of disappeared. In fairness, most 18-year-olds don't want to hang around a cancer patient and kind of go through that. But a lot of them headed off to college, and I didn't see them again. But I have a couple heroes in the book that stood by me. So a lot of bad influences, a lot of bad intakes in high school. Cancer, I was trying to survive. And then post-cancer, eventually I started to get a perspective. It was due to a movie that I watched, but I started to form a perspective of the glass half full and how cancer became a blessing. And I think over time, to your point, I do think it's important. Social media is a great example. Social media, most everything you see on there is not good, right? It's negative. Right. It's division amongst, whether it's politics or whatever it is. It's just not positive. And so I'm not perfect. My wife gets on me about watching The Walking Dead.
I can't believe you're not perfect. What?
No, well, I mean, when it comes to this, right? Like I do try to really digest positive things.
Right.
I was going to say my wife gets on me for watching The Walking Dead. She's like, why do you watch this? It's awful. So there are exceptions. But yeah, I do think it's important. I try to digest a lot of positive things and keep a positive mindset.
Well, I think that's really important for your story because, as you mentioned, you felt as if the drinking and your way of life had an impact on your cancer. And then based on your experience and your healing journey, the impact of gratitude and some of these positive areas and what a healthy impact that had on you, which it appears as if you've now carried into your life. And we're going to talk about how it's impacted your leadership style. But you can go ahead and talk about the movie that you watched. First off, I had no idea how unsuccessful that movie was when it was first released, which I love that story.
Yeah, it was. So I got through cancer, and it was about 9 or 10 months of chemotherapy, and it would have been my first year in college. And I ended up changing the college I was going to go to. I went off to the University of Georgia. I just wanted to be a normal kid. I wanted to hang out with everybody else and experience college. And so I didn't talk about cancer. I didn't share it. I didn't want, I had seen reactions of people from high school. Right. And so I didn't want to be a downer and be talking about cancer. So I really didn't share it. In fact, I have friends of 35, 37 years that this book's come out, and they're like, I had no idea that we hung out for 4 years in college, and I had no idea.
Wow.
But it was that Christmas break, my first year at Georgia, and I was headed home for the break, and a pledge brother of mine in a fraternity basically brought up It's a Wonderful Life. And I said, I've never watched that, heard of it. And he was shocked. And he was like, it's an awesome movie. You got to watch it, at Christmas time. So I went home back during the days of Blockbuster. I went and rented it, and I just loved it. And the reason I loved it, it's for your listeners who don't know, the synopsis is basically it's back in the 30s, I believe. There's a gentleman, and he's got basically grows up in this small town. He hates it. It's boring. He wants to get out. And he basically gets to a point, there's some turmoil and there's an antagonist, but he gets to the point where he's facing jail time for something he didn't do, and he's despondent, and he makes a wish that he wishes he had never been born. And so this angel grants him the wish, and then the second half of the movie is what life and all his friends and family, what their life would be like had he not been born. And that movie really resonated for me because I was like, my angel was cancer. Like cancer was my wake-up call and just changed the way that I view everything post-cancer. And so I just saw a lot of correlations in that. Ever since then, it's been my favorite movie. I watch it multiple times every Christmas. I usually tear up every time I watch it. But yeah, there were just a lot of, I think it changed his perspective. You don't see what life's like. He's given his life back. And I always imagine like, what would a sequel to that look like? And he would live his life totally different. I mean, you can see it at the end of the movie. So, but yeah, that movie started to form a glass half full perspective in the way that I looked at cancer. Like for 4 years in college, for the most part, I didn't want to think about cancer. I didn't want to spend time thinking about it. But that movie started me down a path of trying to look at the blessings or the benefits that came out of my experience.
I love that. And when I was reading that in your book, I was just, you can't help but pause for a moment and think, oh, what would this world be like if I'd never been born, right? And I'm a big believer of like the butterfly effect and just trying to have a positive impact in everywhere that you can go, because you never know where that's going to have a huge impact on somebody else's life and what that cascade effect will be. And I think, first off, reading your book, cancer absolutely saved your life. There's no way you were going to live after all of that.
Yeah, I was either going to die or go to prison.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like on pins and needles. I was like, he's like, someone's going to get in a car accident, someone's going to die. Like this is really tough. And I like one thing that really spoke to me. And so this is in the earlier part of the book on page 41, where you talk about how people handle tragedy and grief differently. And I want to talk about that because I think it also ties into, and maybe we can tie it as well into leadership, how people handle obstacles differently. So in the book, you say, that moment of diagnosis and subsequent gatherings with my family was my first exposure to the diverse ways people handle tragedy, life's challenges, and conflict. And here you were talking about the way that your sister dealt with it versus how some other people dealt with it. And I know in my own personal life, my first child was stillborn, and the way that I handled that loss versus the way that my ex-husband handled the loss really impacted the rest of our lives. And I've always been a glass half full kind of person. I'm very much an optimist. And so I think that really has had a big impact. And so when I think about this, can you talk a little bit about how you experienced that with your cancer? And then also, I know that you are known as one of these people that comes in and helps organizations really be able to handle challenging times. So how does that also fit into it from a leadership perspective?
Yeah. So everybody in my family, I have two siblings. I'm the oldest of three. And then my parents have been married for 50 something years. But at that time, we all gathered around the dining room table after I was diagnosed, and each person had a different reaction. My reaction, just to give you an idea of what a bad spot I was in, I was devastated because the surgeon had said no drinking for a year and maybe never again. And my mind was swirling the entire time. That's what I was fixated on. But I also noticed the reactions of everybody in my family. And you mentioned my sister, Angela. She was stone cold, no reaction. I knew she loved me. I knew that, we always I had a better relationship with her than I did with my brother. We always fought. We were closer in age. My brother is bawling like a baby, like my mom. And she didn't show any reaction. And she later became a doctor. She's a pediatrician. She's had to tell parents that they lost a child. And I always look back on that, think that was probably an indicator that she was going down the right career path. But that really hit me, I think. I was never empathetic prior to cancer. I was selfish. I just cared about myself. I cared about partying. I cared about my social life. Didn't really think about the impact that all my behaviors were having on my parents or other loved ones. And so that really hit me, other than in addition to not being able to drink, it hit me that they all had such diverse reactions. And I left and went and drove around for a few hours around North Georgia, just, basically in my own thoughts, trying to process having cancer. But I thought a lot about how my family reacted. In business over time, I've managed a lot of people and have been responsible for large, sales organizations. And we all experience loss. It's not a loss and hardship and tragedy and sickness. There's things are going to happen in our life. It's not a question of if, but when. And I would say I didn't realize this early on in my leadership career, but over time I learned that people handle it differently, just really differently. And, some are healthy, some are unhealthy. I had somebody recently tell me that they've been dealing with some things and they've dealt with it by diving into work more, and that's not healthy. And I think they realize that. It's everybody handles that in different ways. And I think as a leader, I didn't do this my first year or two, but I eventually learned to be more empathetic and understand that. I think one of the big mistakes, kind of leading into leadership, I think one of the big mistakes new managers make is trying to manage everybody how you would want somebody managing you.
Oh, yes.
And I did that. I read a book called, I think it was 22 Mistakes First-Year Managers Make. I made every single mistake.
Oh, How have I
Every
not
single one
read
of them.
that? I've read so
It
many
was good.
leadership
It may
books.
not be 22. I'm pretty sure it was 22, but I made literally every single
Yeah.
mistake. And but that was one of them. Is that managing people and treating people the way that you would want to be treated, and everybody's different. And so I think over time I learned to listen more, be empathetic more, try to be more understanding when somebody. And you have to balance that with the responsibilities of, I've always worked for a company. I've never owned my own business. So I have responsibilities and I've got obligations to the employer I'm working for, but I try to balance that with understanding that everybody's going to handle a loss or grief or, whatever the challenge is that they're facing in a different way.
Well, the thing that I love about remembering that is that I'm really big about trying to get to know humans as humans. And, when you go back to the first conversation with your sister, one could think, oh, she doesn't love me that much. She's not even crying. She doesn't even look like she cares. Like if you want to judge just on like the face of something. And I think that when we instead, realize humans are humans and that someone's reaction to something probably has a lot more depth, not probably, absolutely has a lot more depth than what's on the surface. And so sometimes I think in a business perspective for a leader, it's that if you observe something that perhaps feels a little uncharacteristic with you, that's an opportunity to ask questions, to tell me more, to try and dig in and understand more about the heart of what the situation is.
Yeah, definitely, without question. I mean, that's being observant. That's using intuition. That's empathy, and it's also asking questions.
Tell me
I think
more.
all the things you just mentioned, all those are important. And I got into my first leadership role when I was 27. I was still pretty immature. And those things, I had to focus on developing those and getting good at those, especially like in chaotic, stressful situations. It's hard to slow down and do that, but those are so important.
So I'm dying to read this quote, and I've been sitting here thinking, how far into the interview will I wait to read this quote? This is my favorite quote in the book, and it's, no offense, it's the poem you put in here, so you didn't write it. But I was actually just sharing this at church recently because it's towards the end of the book on page 145 where you talk about the value of time, and where it starts with, imagine there's a bank which credits your account each morning with $86,400 and carries over no balance from day to day, and every evening cancels whatever part of the amount you had failed during the day. And so it goes through like, what would you do with it? But the thing I loved about it is the focus on the value of time. And where it says, to realize the value of 1 year, ask a student who failed a grade, which I think for you, the value of a year, you lost a year while you were dealing with cancer. You were a year behind in your college education. Plus you had to grow your hair back.
Yeah, correct.
To realize the
that
value
grew back pretty quick, but yeah.
To realize the value of 1 month, ask a mother who gave birth to a premature baby. To realize the value of 1 week, ask the editor of a weekly newspaper. To realize the value of 1 hour, ask the lovers who are waiting to meet. To realize the value of 1 minute, ask a person who missed the train. To realize the value of 1 second, ask a person who just avoided an accident. To realize the value of 1 millisecond, ask the person who won the silver medal in the Olympics. So treasure every moment you have, and treasure it more because you shared it with someone special enough to spend your time. So first, I want to thank you for spending some of your time here, because everything you say yes to means you're saying no to something else. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
But can you tell me, I mean, I can only imagine that if you're on the brink of, I've got stage 3 cancer, you're hearing the quotes that were, for stage 3, it was 50%?
It was 85.
Okay, 85% survival rate. You're also risking potentially not having children. And then you really, I think you were more than gifted so much more time after, because you would have never had that much time had you continued on your path. So can you talk a little bit about how you value your time now?
Yeah, so I would say a more important statistic than the ones you read is my oncologist told me prior to 1970, this was 1986, so it's only 16 years ago, this would have been a death sentence. And I'll never forget, I remember him saying that. I remember how I was sitting, that hit me hard. And so when that quote you just read, I worked for a large company And I was a first line leader at the time. And our head of sales, who really grew the company and made it a huge success, he actually sent that out on a corporate voicemail. And a lot of people liked it. I loved it because it resonated with me. I thought back about that quote, that every day that I'm living right now, post-cancer, is a gift, because 16 years prior, and I wouldn't still be here. But as far as like, I think as it relates to today and how I lead, our time is so important. And it's part of that's prioritizing your time, but it's also doing what you're passionate about, right? Like, life is short. And so for me, I've always liked helping people. I like leading people. And probably what I like specifically about it is helping somebody get from where they are when I hire them, or where they are when I'm responsible for managing them, to where they leave me, right? To where hopefully they get promoted or they move on to something better. And so I think that poem you just wrote is life is short, right? That's probably big picture. But then it's also using your time wisely.
Absolutely.
And using it in leadership, how you can impact people and change people's lives. So for me, that's the value of time, and where I try to invest my time.
I love that. And you're really big in gratitude, which I am as well. I write my gratitude journal every day. And one of the things that I loved as an example, I'm going to so steal this, is that your thank you slide that you put in your presentations. Can you tell us about that, about how you, one, integrate gratitude into your work, and also how you feed it through to your customers as well?
Yeah, so I've always, and the slide thing is something the company I work for does a lot, but I've always tried to express gratitude. And again, I think a lot of this ties back to cancer. I was very grateful for the people that stood by me and helped me get through it. But I always try to make sure people know I appreciate their efforts, right? It's, at the end of the day in sales, you're usually judged by the number that you close, the business, the revenue. We call it, recurring revenue, subscription revenue in software. But you're always judged by that. But I try to make sure that I recognize the small things. There's so many inputs that go into what a salesperson has to do, from activity to generating opportunities. We call that pipeline, progressing that pipeline. There's so many things they've got to do along the way to eventually close that sale. And I think it's just important to recognize those steps, to recognize progress, recognize small things they do. If I'm coaching somebody in a certain area where maybe they're struggling and they start to show even little baby steps, I just think it's important to express that and let them know that I appreciate that. I appreciate the hard work they're putting in. There's a million examples I could give you, but I just think it's important. People want to feel appreciated.
Yes, absolutely.
I think maybe 50, 60 years ago, there was a mentality in management and leadership that, people were motivated by a paycheck. And I don't think that's true. I think most people leave jobs because of a bad manager. And so making people feel appreciated and respected, and that their efforts are recognized and seen, are so important.
So research does show that people do leave managers and they don't leave jobs, and the salary doesn't matter as much as we thought that it mattered. So I think actually when I was reading this in your book, I thought, I'm just going to start doing a collage of all my guests and their definitions of managers versus leaders. So you'll see where I'm going to go here. So in 165, you talk about managers versus leaders. And you talk about early in your career where you failed to tap into your empathy for others. And during those formative years, you were more of a manager rather than a true leader. And your definition that you placed here, and then I want to hear what your definition is as well, is managers plan, measure, monitor, coordinate, solve, direct, hire, fire, and perform many other actions. In a nutshell, managers manage things. Conversely, authentic leaders inspire and guide people toward growth and success, and empathy is required to do so effectively. Tell us more about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think I had a great mentor. I worked for her for 16 years, and there were a lot of things I learned from her. But I'd say one of the big ones was that your resume is determined by the number of people you help achieve success and achieve what they want to accomplish. This morning, so I brought my team together for a quarterly business review. We do this every 3 months. brought my team together today, and we have like a larger extended team that we work with, but I pulled just my direct reports in for an hour before the big meeting. And we had a conversation on what do you want to accomplish this year and why? Why is that important to you? And everybody thanked me at the end of the day that they thought that was the best part of the day, because the rest of the day was talking about our pipeline, our opportunities, what we're going to do this quarter, next quarter. And that's the first part of the management.
Yeah, all the
definition,
measurements,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And
which are important pieces.
and I have to do those.
Yes,
yeah,
but they're not everything.
Makes me do those.
Right.
Yeah. But that exercise we had this morning, and I opened up a lot. I shared a lot on why I do what I do and what's important to me. And I told them at the end of kind of when I spoke, I said, I hope none of you are working for me next year, because they all went around and talked about their goals, and they all want to either move up market, which is, is a pay increase and more responsibility, or they want to go into management. And I said, I hope none of you are working for me next year. If that's the case, then I've done an incredible job. And
right.
So to me, that's more leadership, is how do I help them get what they want, get to where they want to go. All that other stuff, I have to do it. And it's a majority of my day each day, but that 1 hour we spent this morning, top the rest of the day.
Which I think that's a critical thing to mention, is that I think for managers and for companies and organizations, it's really easy to just focus on the metrics. Now, if you don't measure things and you don't have metrics and you don't have goals that align with those, and I'm lecturing tomorrow at Georgia Tech project management class, and I'm going to talk a lot about setting smart goals and that kind of stuff. So if you don't do those things, you're not going to have success. But the point being is that I think a lot of managers and organizations don't understand that the time and resources spent on the second part is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the first part. Because when people feel empowered, they feel listened to, they feel respected, they feel valued, then they're more eager to actually work and be creative together to accomplish the goals.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think understanding what's important to people and why they do what they do too, then you can tie a lot of those metrics and activities and what you're asking them to do back to what's important to them. I had, I think when things started to click for me as a manager a long time ago, after a couple of years of making so many mistakes, I had a lady who worked for me, and we got into this conversation about, like, she wanted to hit her quota, and I was asking her why does she do what she does, and she basically said, I want to I'm the breadwinner. I want to make as much money as I can. I have 3 kids, and I want to spend as much time with them as possible. So I don't have time for things that are like, I want to be as efficient with my time. So I always, anytime I was trying to get her to do something, even if it was coaching, I always tried to tie it back to, let's reduce the amount of time you're at work. Let's reduce the amount of time it takes to hit your quota. Hitting your quota, you're going to make more money. And so I always tried to tie it back to her number one goal was providing for her children and spending more time with them.
Which I'm thinking of, if you're a project manager, you're going to say, who are the stakeholders in this situation? And actually, the children and family were stakeholders that you needed to consider in the evaluation to help her be as successful as possible.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so I know that you emphasize the importance of creating a winning culture. What key leadership principles do you follow to foster success in your teams, in addition to what we just mentioned, of course?
I think it all starts with hiring when you're building a team. And so hiring good people. So I like to look at, past success, track record. And that doesn't have to mean like in the industry or it doesn't even have to mean they've had sales jobs, but where have they achieved success and how did they do it? I'm a little biased on this, but having been through cancer, I like to know what's the toughest thing you've ever been through. How'd you deal with it, personally or professionally?
Yes.
And I give them that option because, I don't want to ask personally in an interview, but if they want to share that. But I always want to understand that you mentioned grit earlier, like getting to that grit. And I want to know that I'm going to be hiring somebody that you go through ups and downs in sales, probably more than a lot of careers, right? Like you'll have awful days and you lose deals and things like that. A lot of things outside your control too. So it starts with hiring the right person. But then, I mentioned this earlier, recognizing the small things, I think, are reinforcing behaviors that are going to get people successful. A big one is I want people that work for me to trust me and have a relationship where they're comfortable with me. And I think that exercise I did this morning hopefully made help solidify that. That they know I've got their back. They know that I'm trying to, whatever it is that's most important to them, I'm trying to help them get that. And then that gives me a lot more leadway to manage and do all those metrics. But I would say I'm big on celebrating success.
Love this.
Yeah,
Tell me more.
whether it's, and again, I go back to, it's not just the person that hit their number or closed the big deal, which is the ultimate prize in sales, but it's recognizing people for lots of behaviors, and somebody could have a great meeting, and that's not putting any money in the company's pocket. It's not putting any money in my pocket or the rep's pocket,
right.
But recognizing that they had this great meeting, or it was the first time they did something in the role. And I think that constant focus on what they're doing right, catching somebody doing something right.
Yes.
And this is so cliche, but it's also praise in public, catch somebody doing something right, recognize them in front of all their peers. And if it's something that needs to be corrected or given coaching on, do that one-on-one. Never do it in front of people.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of things like that, I think, that build a winning culture. But over time, I've worked for people that don't want you to get promoted. They don't want you to move on and leave.
Because you're so amazing at your current job. No one else could do it better. We want to just keep you here.
Yeah. And so, I think I've built over my career, a reputation of that I'm going to help you get to where you want to go. And it's easy to say that, but I think I've got a track record. And once I'm in a role, I've been with my current company over 6 years. I've done that a number of times. And so people see that, and then they know, like, this person wants to help me be successful. They want to help me get so that's how I that's probably my biggest secret to building a winning culture. So yeah, I don't know if that answers you.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm a very strong believer in focusing on helping to grow everyone on your team. And my philosophy, when I was helping to build Florence Healthcare, I would say to a lot of the team members, like, I really hope that you'll stay here at Florence for 3 years. And then when you go somewhere else, I want you to have grown so much during that period of time that whatever job you interview at, you will be the top candidate. And first, it's going to make you so you're so successful. And then people also say, oh, wow, this person came from Florence. They must have a great company. And it's a win-win across the board. And I think that, and so I started a 5 resume bullet point program that I do with all of my team members at every company I've had since then. And it's really trying to focus on what are the 5 things that you want to improve. And it could be work related, like some have taken project management courses, some have done Toastmasters. It could be just personally related, like you mentioned. Sometimes I've had team members that wanted to have a little bit more balance, so they wanted to focus their time so they could do yoga or do a health retreat or something like that. And then we could work milestones around some achievements that would lead towards that. But I think that the idea that work, like, you can create work as an environment where people are thriving and growing and passionate about what they're doing is going to pay off for the company. And I think to all of the managers, because leaders do not do this, to all of the managers that want to hold team members back, they really have no idea what they're missing out on.
Yeah. And so many people do that.
So many.
A lot too. I've worked for people that do that.
Yeah.
But I think building a winning culture, when people know you care about them and they know that you are trying to help them get to where they want to go, over time, you're going to build a reputation as a leader that does that. And I think then people want to win for you. They want to,
yes.
Yeah, they want to work hard and they want to achieve the team goal. That exercise I did this morning, I've done it one-on-one with people. Mm-hmm. I thought it was really powerful that we all shared in that. And I found that they were asking their peers questions about, like, oh, well, why this or why that, or why do you want to take this trip? And so they were all kind of getting involved and getting engaged with each other.
Love that.
Goals. Yeah. And so it was a good group exercise. And again, I think that helps build a winning culture.
So I've heard that you're also known as the turnaround specialist. So tell us a little bit more about that. What skills do you use when you're trying to turn a team, a culture, or an organization around?
That's a great question. It depends on the scenario, Angela. I would say when I've taken over teams that are underperforming, I try to come in, operate with kind of an analytical and empathy, and try to evaluate the situation. There's a great book called The First 90 Days.
Yes,
You heard of that?
yes.
Yeah,
It's
and
great.
it's all about like try not to make any decisions.
Huge
if you don't-
changes. Yep.
Yeah, if you
Yep.
have to in the first 90 days. So I think when I take over a new team or a new role, I've read that book several times, and I always try to practice that of come in and evaluate. And and there are times where you make that assessment that there may be some people on the team that need to go, right?
They need to transition to another opportunity that's not on your team.
Yeah, and I think a long time ago, I probably did, in the beginning, I didn't always handle that great.
Yeah.
I would say now I really try to do it with empathy, and I try to help them understand why they're struggling and maybe they're in the wrong role, that they could be happier
Yes.
in another role. And I've helped people in that situation connect them with recruiters and things that really aren't part of my job or maybe even my company wouldn't want me doing. But I try to help them, again, get to where they want to go, even if they're not performing and they need to go somewhere else. I'm going to try to help them get to where they need to go. Starting with evaluating the talent and the people I have, I want to make sure I get the right people on the bus.
Yep.
And then it's about, again, I keep going back to that, but it's understanding what's important to each of them and where they want to go. And then I try to coach and develop those people and help them get better at their day-to-day job so that they can reach where they want to go and have that success. I know that sounds very simplistic, but that's
no. I
the
agree 1,000%. When one of the big things at Florence, one of the reasons our culture was so great when I was there was that we had some team members who were we had a couple who were in roles that it wasn't the great fit. The role wasn't the right role for them. And I was able to move them to different departments and they just exploded and they thrived and they did great. And these are people that other people in the leadership thought should no longer be at the company. And now they're a huge asset in a role that's appropriate for them. We had some other people that tried to coach and they just were not a good fit. And we did the exact same thing, helped them find their next opportunity. And I think to be able to do that and participate to that, to me as a leader, it's like the greatest gift I could have. Because I do strongly, I realize these people have families and they have bills and they have livelihood, and it can really hit your self-esteem and confidence and all of that when you're transitioned out of a company. So to have someone who is saying, okay, you're not the best fit for this organization, however, you have great skills, let's find what you're great at. I think that's just a gift to give back to humanity. It's amazing.
Yeah, without question. One other thing I would add, Angela, is that when I do start, ironically, the biggest turnaround I ever was put in was my first management job. It was a dumpster fire. It was, I was working for a national publicly traded company, about 130 offices around the country. And we were bottom 5%, might have been bottom 2 or 3%.
Oh, wow.
It was bad. And so it was my first 2 years. I didn't hit my number. I worked for that lady that I mentioned earlier.
Yep.
I had worked for as an individual contributor. And so luckily she was patient with me. She coached me. She taught me a lot. But one of the things I learned in that role is I always like to look at activity and attitude. Mm-hmm. If somebody doesn't have those two things, I'm not going to care more than you do. And two, I'm not going to, if you're not trying and you're not putting in the effort. And so as an example, I came in and I wanted to start to change the culture there. And this company always put out monthly rankings of all the 1,000 salespeople.
Oh, wow.
You could get the entire rankings. And so I handed these out, and because we had done this, I had come from the Atlanta office. I had moved to Tampa, taken over the Tampa office. The Atlanta office was always successful. The Tampa office was not. And so the first page was like 50 people, and so it was the top 5%. And I would, over time, I would end up highlighting people on that first page that were on my team and give kudos and recognize them, creating that culture of success or winning culture. But first month, second month, taking over this team, a gentleman sitting in there said, this is Tampa, we will never have anybody on the first page of the rankings. And so I probably didn't handle that as best as I could. But I did make up my mind that is not somebody, like, he doesn't have the right attitude, right?
Right.
And I sat
right.
down and talked to him, and he was like, nobody's ever been on the first page. And I'm like, well,
Yet.
if you don't, eventually we dominated the first page. But I think that activity and attitude, I mean, those are two things you can't really coach. You know, if somebody's got a really bad attitude or they're not putting forth the effort, I can't coach that.
Right.
So that's one of the first things I evaluate when I take over a team.
Well, and the thing that I think is so important about that example is that I love the phrase "a drop of vinegar spoils the milk," and if you have, someone like that, and they're feeding that into the rest of the team, then everyone's confidence is dropping, and everyone starts to believe that that's the case. Versus if you have someone on the team that says, "We're not on the first page yet, but we want to get there. How can you help us get there?" That's the kind of attitude that I want on a team.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I had just hired 2 people in that role, and I was very protective of them. And I pulled them aside, I think later that day. And I said, hey, that comment this morning really didn't sit well with me. And I said, I have hired you two to help change the culture here. And I know that you're brand new, but you two will be on the front page. And if people think like that, they're not going to be on the. And sure enough, both of those 2 people ended up being 2 of my top performers.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about adversity. So in Grapefruit, you talk about reframing adversity. So how do you apply this mindset in business when facing setbacks or uncertainty?
Easy. I always, anytime I'm having a bad day.
I love that you said adversity, I'll handle it, and it's easy.
The way I approach it is easy. It doesn't always go easily, but I always think about, like I said, there's not a day that goes by I don't think about cancer. So if I'm having a bad day, I always compare it to the worst day the best day I had going through cancer does not compare to the worst day I've had since, especially in business. I mean,
right.
I've had bad days. The last day of my fiscal recently was awful. We dealing with a client and a renewal, and there were like a lot of things that went south, and it was stressful. I was not happy, and there were several times during that day where I reminded myself, you're not on chemotherapy. You're not, like, all the things that I went through. So a lot of times for me, it's grounding myself in, you've been through a lot worse. You got through it. And I have to remind myself of that a lot. Because if not, you become a victim and you think about why me and why is this happening to me? I've been through a lot worse.
Right.
And I think a lot of people have. If you think about the worst thing you've ever been through, and you remind yourself of that when you think you're having a bad day, you might be having a bad day, but it doesn't compare to what you've been through in the past.
Right. I like, what I do now is if I start getting really stressed or anxious, I'm in a new job right now, and I have a lot of work to do at this new role. And I think I recall back the times when I was younger, and I used to think, oh my gosh, if I don't do this perfect now, the world's going to come to end. Or we're going to, I'm going to get fired for, like, all these doomsdayer things that I would think. And things always worked out. Like, I always figured out a solution. Or if it wasn't perfect, like, things still went on and I still had other opportunities. It was never, all the worrying I did back then, it was never worth it. Like, it never added a single moment of time, going back to those milliseconds, and it never added any of that to my life. Versus now that I've mastered, like, breathing and sitting back and thinking, okay, is there a different angle or a different perspective, somebody I can pull in who knows this area a lot more than what I do that I can ask advice for? Why don't I just sit in that moment versus sitting in agony and pain that is really self-created?
Yeah. And probably a lot of that's come with maturity. Experience.
Yeah, so all the young listeners here, just know you're going to eventually feel this way.
Yeah. You'll start to figure it out. Yeah, you'll eventually figure it out.
So let's talk about paying it forward. So how do you encourage leaders to integrate purpose and social impact into their professional careers?
I think a lot of people get into leadership because they like helping people. They like, and that's what that is, right? Giving back, paying it forward is helping people. And I think the longer usually most leaders probably have done an individual contributor role, or they've worked their way up into that. And when you think about it, there were a lot of people that probably played a role in your progression and your career track, and that got you to where you needed to be. And so I think for me, it's paying it back as there's people in need. For me, I have a personal passion for an organization based in Tampa. They do national fundraising for pediatric cancer. So for me, that's a no-brainer. But I think, what I would tell leaders and I share is find something you're passionate about where you can give back and you can contribute financially, but contribute your time. And I've worked for some companies. I currently work for one that do a really good job at encouraging that, giving us the time to take off to do things like that. But I try to organize a quarterly team event where we pick a fundraiser, we pick a philanthropy organization, and then we try to raise money for it. And it's a good team building exercise. It feels good. So there's a lot of benefits to it.
Have there been any surprising outcomes from it that maybe you didn't expect, and maybe someone interacted differently after spending a day volunteering than that individual interacted beforehand, or had a different perspective that you thought then showed up in the workforce?
I don't know about that. I've seen people get emotional. I've seen people open up more.
Yeah.
You learn things about people sometimes when that happens, but I've seen that on a number of occasions. Maybe somebody that never shows any emotion and they open up a lot. And no matter how many maybe one-on-ones or field rides I had done with that person, I never would have gotten to that point. But sometimes seeing something moving, or, depending on what philanthropy or what organization it is, that maybe has been kind of a surprise, or maybe a weird benefit in helping me with the relationship and getting to know that person better.
Yeah, no, I love that. I can think of, I love doing charity work with colleagues because, one, at Florence specifically, we would pick a different one per quarter, and we would allow the employees to suggest different ones. So we did trees for Atlanta several times, books for Africa. We did Brushes of Hope, which is Habitat for Humanity, where they paint the outdoor of the house. And what was hysterical is we were repainting out of this house, and we finished, and I'm looking at the colors, and they just happened to also be our company colors. I was like, we are covered with these shades of blue that almost identically match. And none of us had even picked that up, probably because it was 30 degrees outside and we were painting and it was freezing.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it is those moments, because I find that when you're in a spirit of giving back to the world, that individuals just seem to be more open, and you have casual conversations about things, and you just once again get to see humans as humans.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, it ties into what I said I did this morning. We uncovered a lot as far as what motivates people and why they do what they do. And a lot of us, it's family, it's our children, it's friendships, it's things like that. But giving back is also an incredible feeling, and it's a responsibility we have. And I think the more you get to know your employees on that level too, is a whole different aspect. And we've rallied around a lot of different causes, and you see what different people on the team get passionate about. It's great. I think it's a great exercise.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, let's talk about the year of hell methodology thought. Okay, well, and there have been several seasons in the past 5 years that have really had huge impact on society. And so I think, given that, what advice would you give to professionals who are facing their own year of hell?
I would say, whether personal or professional,
either.
Yeah, they're going through something, a low point in their life. I would say first and foremost is lean into family and friends. A lot of times your circle, or you see a much smaller circle of people that are going to do that. That's okay. There's a lot of friends, and I kind of look at a lot of times my relationships and different circles of trust. Meet the Fockers, maybe.
Yeah,
but
I love that.
Different circles of trust.
Right.
But I had a small core group that helped me get through cancer, and I would say leaning into your family and friends that are going to stand by you and help you get through that. Maybe if it's more in the professional space, do you have mentors? Do you have, maybe it could be an old manager who left and went somewhere else, but leaning into the people that can help you get through that, I think is really important. Too, if it's personal or professional, depending on your faith, what I went through really brought me a lot closer to God, and I've had a much closer relationship with him since what I went through. Those would be a couple big ones. And I guess the other one is it's hard to do it in the moment. I didn't think about it during cancer. But no matter what you go through, you can grow and learn and become a better person and transform from it. I do believe that, regardless of what it is, but you have to be open to that. And a lot of people can get bitter or angry, but I would say try to think about, like, how can I exit out of whatever this is? How can I learn from it? And it'll make me better, right? Maybe you got let go from a job. How can I learn from this and become better, right? Maybe it's I'm going to build my network better. I'm going to maintain relationships better because I don't have people I can reach out to. But how do I learn from this experience so that I'm better in the future and I'm better equipped when I hit other types of adversity or this again?
Yeah, I love the relationships and the community building piece of it. You know, the Surgeon General, when he was transitioning out this year, he wrote like his manifesto for America. And the focus was on the importance and the documented health importance of community and friendships and deep relationships. And so it's really been my focus in 2025 is messaging the friends that I care about, even if it's just to say, I'm thinking about you right now. You know, some of those things for those people who I really know I want to spend quality time with. They are, once again, choosing the things that you surround yourself with. So I also have not connected as much with some of the negative people. You know, the people when they start talking, you know everything's going to be negative. You're like, you're bringing me down.
That's that intake. Yeah, you asked me about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that is beautiful. And I know you talked in the book about just the impact that you saw for some other family members who got cancer and the ones and really the mindset or the health impact of a positive mindset and a positive environment. I mean, that's one of the reasons hospitals will try and have bright rooms or, you know, some kind of window to the outside or something like that, because studies have shown that they heal much faster and they leave the hospital faster.
Yeah, definitely. Something you hit on too. I think men are not as good as women at building.
I've heard that.
Maintaining, especially I think, there's a lot of statistics out there that men in their 40s and 50s, they can count on one hand, maybe one or two fingers, how many close friends they have. And I think men struggle more with, issues like suicide and things like that. There's a lot of statistics out there. I'm actually thinking about writing my second book about that because, again, through my experience with cancer, I've got multiple friend groups, and I think I do a really good job of that. And I think more people need to do that. I think more men need to
absolutely
to do that because we, when your kids leave, like my kids are now out of the house, your whole world changes.
Yep.
And it's so easy to get caught up, and you should make your children your focus. But at that next stage in life, your friends and your network and the people like that is so important. And so it's something I've done a really good job at. And I think it's because of my experience with cancer and seeing the people that stood by me. I've realized that I can't have too many of those types of friends.
Right. Well, and I experienced, unfortunately, I grew up in a very abusive household. My father was very abusive, and I observed him as he was dying. He didn't take the time to have any friends or any hobbies or anything like that. It was a very sad end of his life. And when I saw that, it was also a reminder that, you kind of also have a little bit of a choice about how you want to have a perspective on this life and these days, and choosing to see it with positivity and gratitude and the optimism, and sharing that with other people allows you to attract those same types of people as well, which I think is really valuable.
Yeah, no question.
Okay, let's see. So looking ahead, what's next? So you've already said one thing about, and FYI, Simon Sinek is writing a book right now on friendship. I love Simon Sinek. And I have to...
I need to make sure there's no overlap there.
Well, I mentioned his name on the podcast just in hopes one day he'll be on the podcast as well. I think he's a great leader. But he is writing one. So he's doing a lot of interviews and stuff on friendship, which I love. But okay, so books, speaking engagements, other leadership initiatives. What's next for you?
Speaking, I actually, way before this book was even halfway finished, I finished #1 with a company I was at. I had to get on stage in front of about 1,500 people. I basically gave a speech that was about a 16-minute version of my book. So I want to do more of that. Have you heard of Kickstarter platform?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did kind of an early release through Kickstarter, and there were some levels in that of speaking engagements. And
Amazing.
so I think I've got 3 now that I'll be doing where I'll be speaking to a company. But I want to do more of that. I've got, as I mentioned, an idea for a book, and I'd like this to lead to more coaching opportunities outside of my day job. So.
Yeah, I can see where you would add a lot of value to both an individual, especially someone who's potentially struggling in a situation, and maybe think, especially if you tie to the high risk of suicide, especially in men when they struggle in their career or something. And I can think with a lot of changes right now, you might have a lot of individuals who are struggling and maybe need to pivot or something like that. And having a great coach like yourself would be amazing. Okay, so if there was one leadership lesson that you wanted to leave the listeners with today, what would it be?
It would be, it's not about you, right? So when you become a leader, it's not about you anymore. It's about the people you're responsible for developing. And I would say, I hit on this earlier, but I would say help them get to where they want to go, right? And if you do that successfully over time, people will want to work for you. They will fight for you to be as successful as possible. I would say start there. And I would say that's, and then the other thing is be present. I do believe that our smartphones, social media, Slack, text, email, I mean, it comes at you. I find it's harder and harder to be present with somebody and give them your full attention. And I try to be really cognizant of that. And so it's hard to build that following and let people know that you're trying to help them get to where they want to go if you're on your phone and multitasking.
Absolutely.
So be in the moment too, and make it all about them.
Love it, love it. So help grow the people around you and be in the moment. And as you started off with, it's not about you.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can listeners find you and your book?
So my book's on Amazon, Grapefruit, Greatfruit.
Hold it up right now.
And then also my website.
I'll be Vanna.
SteveGarraty.com.
Awesome. Okay, and the final requirement of this podcast is that you have to share your favorite motivational quote. So what is your favorite motivational quote?
So I have 2. One I used in the book.
Knew you were going to throw 2 in there.
Yeah, one I had in the book, and it's Charles Swindoll, and it's it sums up my book. I think it's life is 10% what happens to us, and it's 90% how you respond. And like I said, bad things are it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. What we do control is how we respond. And you can learn from it and grow from it, or you can be angry and bitter. And so I think being open to that quote is great as it relates to being glass half full and perspective. The second one, probably not, the most, probably a controversial figure, but Lance Armstrong said that pain is temporary, but quitting is forever. Yeah. And I love that quote. I just always stuck with me. And there's a lot of times I want to quit something. It could be anything you're learning for the first time, but that is so true, that quitting will stick. You'll always have that regret of quitting something, and pain is temporary, no matter how bad it is.
Yep. Well, thank you for being a guest on the podcast. Thank you for bringing the badass to this podcast. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.